What if Meri and Kody were actually closer to reconciliation than fans ever realized, and then something changed that ended the possibility completely? What seemed like a simple anniversary conversation suddenly opened the door to one of the most complicated chapters in Meri and Kody's relationship, because after more than 3 decades of marriage, the question was no longer just how many years they had shared together. It was whether there was still something between them worth saving, and what makes this moment so interesting is that Kody himself admitted that something had changed inside him. He explained that he was no longer carrying the same anger toward Meri for the things he believed had happened throughout their life together, and instead, he was finally willing to look at his own mistakes and consider whether the two of them could actually find a way forward again. That possibility was enough to make the situation even more complicated, because Meri was not the only person involved in this emotional story. Kody was also navigating his relationships with Christine, Janelle, and Robin, and when he suggested that maybe Meri and he could work things out, it created a reaction among the other women that showed just how difficult reconciliation could become behind the scenes. Meri remembered the small traditions that had once connected them, including the Rice Krispie treats she made every year for their anniversary, something simple that carried years of emotional meaning. And according to the conversation, there was a particular anniversary when Kody appeared more open to putting the past behind them and considering whether they could reconnect, but then another memory completely changed the picture, because on that same day, Meri remembered spending time with Kody during a picnic and believing that perhaps this could finally be the moment when their relationship moved in a different direction. She said she had been waiting for him, while he seemed to believe that she should have been the one courting him, and that confusion revealed how far apart they had become even when they were physically together. Yet, Meri still described a moment when she wondered whether there was a possibility of bringing back the connection they once had. After the cameras were turned off, she approached Kody, put her arms around his neck, and asked what he would do if she kissed him right then. His reaction became one of the most revealing parts of the conversation, because instead of simply dismissing the idea, he appeared conflicted and backed away, saying that he could not do it, and that moment left Meri with the impression that at least for a brief moment, he had considered what it might mean if they tried again. But the possibility did not last through the evening, and that is where the story becomes even more complicated, because while Meri believed there might still be an opening, Kody was also dealing with the reactions surrounding him, and another family gathering reportedly changed how he viewed the situation. And this is exactly where the story connects back to Christine, because information about a possible reconciliation was apparently not something everyone knew about, and when the subject came up, the reaction showed that there were still major gaps in what each person understood about Kody and Meri's relationship. And the biggest question now becomes what really happened during those private moments that made Kody consider reconciliation and then step back from it, because the answer may explain why Meri spent so much time believing there was still a chance when the relationship eventually moved in a completely different direction. And if that was not complicated enough, another revelation was still waiting, because Meri said she had never known about one of the moments involving Christine until this conversation, and that discovery forced her to look at the entire situation from a completely different perspective, which means the anniversary story was not simply about a marriage reaching another year. It was about two people standing at a crossroads and wondering whether the history between them could still become a future. And just when it seemed like the answer might finally be yes, something else entered the picture and changed everything. The most important part of the story is that reconciliation was never as simple as one person deciding they wanted another chance, because there were years of emotions, misunderstandings, and changing relationships standing between Meri and Kody. And when Kody said he was willing to see the error of his ways, it suggested that he understood there were things he needed to examine within himself before deciding whether the marriage could work again. For Meri, that opening was meaningful because she had spent so much time hoping that their connection could return, and the anniversary tradition represented something much deeper than a yearly celebration. It represented a time when their relationship still felt recognizable, and when the two of them could remember why they had chosen each other in the first place. But the picnic conversation showed how uncertain that possibility really was, because Meri believed she had been waiting for Kody, while Kody believed Marigold had been pursuing him. And when two people are waiting for each other, while neither one understands what the other expects, even a moment that looks promising can disappear quickly. Then came the moment when Meri tested the possibility directly by asking what he would do if she kissed him, and instead of giving her the answer, she may have hoped for Kody backed away and said he could not do it, which left Meri with a complicated feeling, because on one hand his reaction suggested that the idea affected him enough to create an emotional response, while on the other hand his decision showed that he was not prepared to cross that line, and that distinction matters, because it reveals the difference between remembering what a relationship once was and actually being ready to rebuild it. And then the situation became even more difficult when the subject of reconciliation involving Christine entered the conversation, because Meri said she had never known about that particular moment, and suddenly the story was no longer just about what Kody had said to Meri, it was also about what different members of the family knew and when they knew it, and that missing information created an entirely different picture for Meri, because learning something years later can make a person question moments they thought they understood at the time, and this is where the story leaves us with the biggest unanswered question: if Kody was genuinely considering reconciliation with Meri during that period, what changed between those conversations, and the eventual end of their relationship? Was it simply the passage of time? Was it the complicated family dynamic? Or did the events surrounding Christine and the other relationships make it impossible for Meri and Kody to find their way back to what they once had? The conversation does not provide one simple answer, but it does reveal something important. Meri was not imagining that there had been moments when reconciliation appeared possible, and Kody himself acknowledged that he had reached a point where he could look at his past differently, yet the fact that those moments never became a lasting reconciliation shows just how complicated their relationship had become. And that is why this old conversation matters today, because when you look at what happened afterward, those brief moments of uncertainty suddenly feel much more significant, and the anniversary that once represented decades of marriage became a reminder of a relationship that came close to another beginning but ultimately moved toward a very different ending. And the question that remains is whether Meri finally understood what Kody could not give her at the time, or whether she had been holding onto those small moments because she still believed the story. What makes this story even more interesting is that the possibility of reconciliation did not disappear because there was suddenly one dramatic argument or one obvious decision. Instead, it seems to have faded through a series of small moments that left Meri trying to understand what Kody really wanted, because for a long time, she could see signs that he was not completely closed off to the idea of rebuilding their relationship, and that uncertainty can be harder than a clear answer. When someone tells you there is absolutely no future, you eventually know where you stand, but when someone leaves the door slightly open, you can spend years wondering whether you should walk through it, and Meri appeared to be caught in exactly that situation. The anniversary tradition, the picnic, the conversation about their future, and even the moment when she asked about a kiss all created tiny flashes of possibility, but none of them turned into something lasting, and that raises an important question about what was happening emotionally between them at that time, because Kody was saying he was willing to examine his own mistakes, while Meri was still trying to determine whether the connection between them could return, and at the same time the larger family situation was becoming increasingly complicated. Every relationship around them seemed to affect the space between Meri and Kody, and when information about other reconciliation conversations came into the discussion, Meri was left realizing that there were parts of the story she had never known about before. That realization matters because it changes how she could look back at those years and wonder whether she had been given the complete picture or only pieces of it. And perhaps the most revealing part is that Meri did not seem to be asking for some perfect version of the past. She appeared to be trying to understand whether there was still enough trust, affection, and willingness between them to create something new. Yet the more they talked, it became that wanting reconciliation and being ready for reconciliation were two completely different things, and this is where the story takes another turn, because once the possibility of getting back together began to fade, Meri had to face a difficult reality. She could not make the decision for both of them. She could keep remembering the good moments, she could hold on to the anniversary traditions, and she could wonder what might have happened if certain conversations had gone differently. But eventually, Kody would have to decide whether he truly wanted to rebuild the marriage, and Meri would have to decide whether waiting for that decision was still worth it, and that is what makes these old conversations so revealing today, because when we already know how their story eventually developed, every small moment suddenly carries more weight. The words that once sounded uncertain now feel like clues to a relationship that was already moving toward its final chapter, and perhaps the biggest question is not whether Kody considered reconciliation, because according to the conversation, he did. The bigger question is why that possibility never became a real future for them, and what happened between the moment when he said he was willing to see his own mistakes and the point when Meri finally understood that she could no longer build her future around the possibility of him changing, because sometimes the most difficult ending is not when someone says no, but when they keep giving you just enough hope to make you wonder if the answer could someday become yes. And that unanswered question is exactly what makes Meri and Kody's story so compelling, because the moments when they almost found their way back to each other may tell us more about their relationship than the final ending ever could. But there is another side of the story that makes the situation even more important, because when Meri looks back at those moments, the question is not simply whether she and Kody could have reconciled. The question is how many times the possibility appeared only to disappear again, and that uncertainty may have made the eventual ending even harder to understand. For years, Meri had memories that reminded her of the relationship they once shared, and those memories were not meaningless. They represented a time when their marriage had a clear place in the family and when their anniversary traditions still carried emotional weight. Yet as the years passed, the relationship changed and the distance between them became harder to ignore. Then came those conversations where Kody appeared willing to reconsider the past, and Meri was left trying to understand whether this was a genuine opportunity or simply a moment of reflection, because there is a huge difference between saying "I remember what we had" and saying "I am ready to build it again," and the conversation suggests that difference became increasingly important. Meri could remember the good moments and still recognize that the relationship could not survive on memories alone. She needed consistency, she needed clarity, and most importantly, she needed to know whether Kody was actually willing to move forward with her rather than simply looking back at their history. And that is where the emotional tension of this story really begins, because every small sign of hope could easily bring back feelings that Meri had spent years trying to understand, while every setback could make that hope disappear again. And the situation involving Christine added another layer, because Meri discovered information that she had not previously known, and suddenly some of the events surrounding that period looked different from her perspective. She was hearing about conversations and moments that had happened while she was trying to understand her own relationship with Kody, and that realization could naturally leave anyone wondering what else they had misunderstood at the time. Yet instead of turning this into a simple story about who is right or wrong, it is more revealing to look at the choices each person was making. Kody was trying to determine what he wanted, Meri was trying to determine whether waiting still made sense, and the other family relationships were changing around them, creating circumstances that made reconciliation even more difficult. And perhaps that is why the anniversary memory matters so much, because it represents the point where the past and future seem to meet for just a moment. Meri had a tradition that symbolized their years together. Kody was reportedly willing to reconsider some of his feelings, and there was enough emotional uncertainty for both of them to wonder whether their story might continue. But the possibility never became stable, and eventually Meri had to face the fact that a relationship cannot be rebuilt by one person alone. And this brings us back to the question that has followed their story for years: what exactly changed after those moments when reconciliation seemed possible? Because if Kody was genuinely willing to examine his own mistakes and Meri was still open to seeing whether they could work together, then something had to stand between that possibility and the ending we eventually saw. And that missing piece is what makes the story worth revisiting, because sometimes the biggest clues are not found in the final decision, but in the moments immediately before it, when people reveal what they wanted, what they feared, and what they were still hoping could happen. And for Meri, those moments may have shown that she was not simply holding on to an old marriage. She was trying to understand whether there was still a real relationship underneath everything that had changed. And the answer became clearer only with time, because eventually she had to stop asking whether Kody. Meri and Kody's story took a turn no one expected. If you want more Sister Wives updates like this, subscribe now. You don't want to miss what happens next.